session now. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our special webinar today on customer centricity. Today's webinar speaker is David Fradin, who is globally known as the guru of product management. David has trained over thousands of product managers throughout the world and has also authored a few books on product management. He has over 47 years of experience in this field, during which he has been instrumental in the launch of over 75 products. David has also worked with leading product companies such as Apple and HP. David conducts online courses and in-person boot camps that are based on his book called Building Insanely Great Products. These companies cover the complete product management lifecycle, starting with the founding values, vision, and product management that is employed by Apple today. David, we are delighted to have you here. Thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to listen to you today and interact with you. So without further ado, I hand over this session to David.
Thank you. Good evening from Silicon Valley, where it is just 4:30 in the morning. And thank you for the lovely introduction. So with that, I'll be able to skip through some of my first few slides to give you a little bit of my background. But in thinking about the topic of this customer-centric, the fact is that the world has gone from an agricultural economy to an industrial revolution, to an information revolution, and now to a customer-centric revolution. And those companies in the world that are the most customer-centric are tending to be the most valuable companies in the world. And I thought I'd give you a little bit of perspective, at least from the United States history point of view. I wish I knew more about the history of India and other parts of the world to see if this tracks the same way. But I think part of the reason that the United States is the largest economy in the world is because of its movement in that direction over the last 80 years. So these are the topics that I'm going to cover. It's the history of becoming a customer-centric set of businesses, how to stay close to the customer, the concept, which is just fairly recent, maybe within the last 10 to 20 years, of the whole product concept, the whole customer concept, whereby the company thinks about everything that they provide as the entire product, not just the hardware or the software or the food item or whatever it may be. And then the fourth topic I'll talk about is how can you really begin to understand what the customer needs are and learn why the latest fad of doing ideation is not going to be necessarily successful, where the sources of innovation can come from. And then a critical thing is, if you're involved with a business now or at any time in the future, the most important thing is to try to figure out what business you're in and define that business widely rather than narrowly in terms of the market that you're in. So as mentioned, that's a little bit of my background. In fact, that was a picture that was taken in downtown Bangalore a few years ago when I was there training a couple of companies. I am the official product management and product marketing trainer for Cisco worldwide. And I've trained about 500 people at Cisco on how to do product management, including about 25 people in Bangalore, and also Cisco people in Shanghai. And just last week, I trained people in Paris and London and in Israel and in Turkey via WebEx. This is one of the books that I released late last year. Based upon my experience, and it covers what needs to be done. And then these are a series of 7 books that Manipal University has decided to pick up for their product management curriculum. I think it's an 11-month certification program, and it covers the entire breadth of the product life cycle. And I decided to title it Foundations in the Successful Management of Products, because the title of product manager is not fairly well understood in most parts of the world, but the idea of understanding what it takes to have a successful product is, and that's why I titled it as is. A little bit of my background is I was responsible for bringing to market the first hard disk drive for a personal computer. a 5.25-inch disk drive, and you can see it here in this picture. It's the Apple profile. I get my cursor working. It's this thing right here. It was a fantastic product. It had 5 megabytes of memory and cost over $3,600. But people at the time when I introduced it at Comdex in Las Vegas in 1983 could not understand why they needed 5 megabytes of space. They didn't understand the concept of a directory in the way that you organize your files, that is folders and files. I then went on to become the Mass Storage Planning Manager, the Apple III Group Product Manager, and then when the rest of the company, which could not at the time understand that there was a small business home office market and a small and medium business market, the MBA trained people there, because they hadn't identified the market, didn't think there was any place in the marketplace for the Apple III, which I was responsible for there. And they, along with Steve Jobs, helped cancel this product. This is the very first of the 3 major failures of Steve Jobs' career. And his first patent is on this case for the Apple III that you see down here. He abhorred the thought of the noise from a fan. So this had no fan in it, and it was just an aluminum, a chunk of aluminum that was carved out and served as a large heat sink. And I took over and was asked to be the business unit manager with full authority over the product line, which was the first time in the history of Apple that a product manager was given the authority that product managers used to have when it started at Procter & Gamble as brand managers back in 1932. And one of the things that happened there is I had the opportunity to hear Tom Peters in Search of Excellence speak at Apple University. And what I thought I would do is give you a little bit of the history of this. And when I heard Tom Peters speak, he was talking about get close to the customer. And that was the reference on the previous slide to America Online. I had set up by Albert Chu, who was working for me at the time. He later went on to be VP of software of Apple, a bulletin board system, which was an early version of what we do now as terms of web pages, specifically for Apple III customers to communicate with us in the factory and also with each other. And the reason for that is Tom said, get close to your customers, and that was based upon his book, In Search of Excellence. And I'll talk more about that in a moment. Back to the history, there was a memo written by Neil McElroy in 1931 about brand management, and I'll share that memo with you in a moment. And he later went on to be president of Procter & Gamble, president of Harvard, deputy secretary of defense, and he was an advisor to Stanford, and hence this concept of brand management began to spread from Cincinnati to Silicon Valley. And this is what his memo said. The key things here is that the purpose of the brand manager, or we call them product managers today, is to focus on the products versus a business function. And it's the product which matches into the customer needs and wants. So you can see back in 1931, he was focused on the customer's needs and wants. And I'll propose a little bit later with a story about Henry Ford and the Model T car, that you can't really ask people what they need or what they want, because they really don't know until that occurs. And I'll talk more about that in a few moments. And here's the rest of that memo, where the product manager may or may not have the authority for all the responsibilities that they have. Now you have to go back and try to understand why this concept of customer-centric is fairly new. And it goes back to the early 1900s, at least as far as the United States is concerned, and I suspect it's influenced the economies around the world as we were transitioning from an agricultural society to an industrial society. And a fellow by the name of Alfred Sloan came along, and he was the chairman of the board of General Motors. And they had a series of automobile brands, starting out with the cheapest of the Chevy, and then moving up in $10,000 increments to Buick, Pontiac, Oldsmobile, and Cadillac. And he put together a interesting thing, and that is a balance sheet and a profit and loss statement. And that was the first time that those types of accounting tools were used. So I think you guys can vote by raising your hand, which is, at least on my screen, is down in the lower right-hand corner. There's a little hand down there. So I'd like to ask everybody, how many people think that inventory is an asset? Just raise your hand. Okay, good. That's what Sloan's profit and loss and balance sheet says, and that is also what the accounting rules say. Unfortunately, when the Great Recession hit, General Motors had, I forgot what it was, something like 15 million cars in inventory, and they couldn't find anybody to buy them. So instead of it becoming an asset, it became a huge liability, so much so that they are on the verge of going out of business until President Obama and Congress stepped in and bailed them out. So it wasn't inventory as much as an asset, and in fact, in recent years, due to the training of Hewlett-Packard and the concept of just-in-time inventory, companies have been rapidly reducing their inventory because despite what the balance sheet says, inventory is a liability. How many people think that people are a cost, by a show of hands? Yep, that's correct. Again, the balance sheet from Alfred Sloan says people are a cost, and that when you have a shrinkage in your business, the first thing you do is start laying people off because they are a cost. Hewlett-Packard, on the other hand, decided that people were an asset, and that during the slow times, and this happened 4 times between its founding in 1938 and 1996, the employees at HP voluntarily took some time off. So instead of working 10 days in 2 weeks, they worked 9 days in 2 weeks, because they realized that if they laid people off in order to cut costs, the cost of bringing them back when the economy turns around exceeded the savings. And in the late 2000s, with the Great Recession, Steve Jobs commented on the same kind of thing. He also said that we're going to double down now on research and development, and that's something that Dave Packard taught him in the late 1980s, and that enabled them to come flying out of the recession, such that Apple's become the most valuable company in the world right now. So inventory is a liability and people are an asset, but unfortunately the way MBA schools teach economics dates back to the 1930s or so, coming from Alfred Sloan. And Sloan also, by the way, delayed the introduction of lean manufacturing for General Motors, while the Japanese picked it up very, very quickly from Hewlett-Packard. A fellow by the name of Dowling taught them, and as a result, the Japanese auto industry overtook the American auto industry big time starting in the 1980s. So I mentioned Neil McElroy, who influenced Stanford, and the primary person he influenced was a fellow by the name of Fred Terman. And Fred was sort of the grandfather of Silicon Valley. And he had in his class the 6 founders of Hewlett-Packard. And down here is a picture of Dave Packard and Bill Hewlett in front of the garage in Palo Alto, California, where HP was founded. And based upon several things, the concept of assets and liabilities, which was different than what MBA students were being learned, the concept of decentralized decision-making, and the concept of the HP way, by founding a company as a set of values and using those values every time you go into a meeting in order to make a decision. That company, Hewlett-Packard, grew nearly 20% a year for 50 years. And I've been racking my brain out since I read Dave Packard's book called The HP Way, which uniquely enough was edited by the guy that hired me into Hewlett-Packard. And I used to handle the personal PR of Dave Packard for a little while and was able to get indoctrinated closely into the values of HP, the HP Way. They grew 20% a year for 50 years without a loss until David Fradin came in and took over the company and decided, driven by the finance guy, Doug Chase, to drop Apple values because they thought it was getting in the way of decision making. And the other thing that they do, HP did, is they decentralized all their decision making until Carly came in and concentrated the decision making up in the corporate offices. When I worked in corporate offices at HP, we had just over 200 people out of 44,000 employees. And that concept of decentralized decision-making, to have the divisions and the manufacturers and the developers as close to the customer, as close to customer-centric as possible. A lot of those people following that same philosophy by 1996 had left, and they had created jobs elsewhere, many of them entrepreneurs, many of them new companies, numbering over 40,000. And this whole concept of customer-centric began to spread throughout Silicon Valley and throughout the world. Another concept that HP had was the next bench syndrome. And the idea was, if a person was working here and they were developing an instrument or a product, and the person sitting over here has some interest in it and likes it, then the person that's right next to them, the customer right next to them, probably would validate that this is a product worth developing and manufacturing. So as a result of being close to the customer, as a result of being customer-centric, HP had a policy of none of their operating divisions would be larger than 500 people. And sales and support were encouraged to always take the side of the customer, not the side of the company's profits, for example. And as a result, it grew 20% a year, every year, for 50 years, until they changed that approach. Then in the late 1980s, after Steve Jobs had the failure with the Apple III, which I was responsible for fixing his mistakes and bringing the product to an end of life and maintain the loyalty of the 75,000 people that bought Apple IIIs, I sold, my division sold 25,000 of them in the last 11 months, and it was the third most popular computer in the world. So while some people call it a failure, including me, many people called it success because of the number that we sold, and it was beloved throughout the world. But the problem that HP had is they had those individual divisions that were operating as individual profit centers, and they were not focused on the total company, whole company, or the whole customer experience. And they had a great deal of difficulty of getting along with each other, that is, the divisions. And when Steve then had after his third failure, the next computer, and he had been stepped out of Next, and all he was doing was coaching Pixar, I found, as I researched for my books, that Steve and Dave Packard sat down together, and Packard explained to him that they were having this trouble with the individual divisions. And that's when Steve, and Packard also told him that it's not enough to build an insanely great product, which is the origination of the title of my book. You got to build an insanely great company. And Steve then evolved the idea of the whole customer experience. And he decided, as Tim Cook has remarked recently, the president of Apple, that they have one profit center at Apple, the entire company, and everyone is pulling in the same direction, focusing on the entire company experience, the entire product experience. So KPIs, key performance indicators, have changed to move from a long-term focus to a short-term focus driven by Wall Street in the early 1980s. And Dave Packard laments about that. It says that, sure, we can increase profits by reducing new product design and development and customer service and buildings and equipment and lay people off, but we have to maintain a balance between short-term profits and an investment for the future strength and growth. And that's exactly what Apple did in the late 2000s, which has enabled them to become the most valuable company in the world. And I had a unique opportunity when I was at Apple. I started there in 1983. This fellow, Tom Peters, came out and spoke to us in Apple University. And these are the things that he discovered by interviewing 41 of the most successful companies in the world. And you notice that in his book, Search of Excellence, that staying close to the customer came up as number 2. Value-driven is another one. Simple, lean. And as part of that, Tom mentioned about staying close to the customer, and that's why I had set up the bulletin board system that I mentioned earlier in order to communicate, and we had about 50,000 of our 75 customers on that bulletin board system. It'd be sort of like having a product page for your product where all of your two-thirds of your customers are registered. I had lunch the other day with the engineer that I hired to build that bulletin board system. And I said to him, you know, a few years later, I happened to be using America Online, which was a precursor to the larger internet. And I said, you know, the user interface in this looked remarkably familiar, like the one that I suggested to you. And he put his head down, looked in his lap, and he smiled, and he looked up at me, and he said it was the same computer software code that later on went on to become the browser for American Online. So inadvertently, you could claim that I was somewhat of a father of AOL. Then one of the interesting things is you begin to look at the brand, and for years, from about the mid-1990s to the mid-2000s, I was using Microsoft products. And they were notoriously unreliable and very, very difficult to use. I was doing a lot of multimedia production, which was very CPU intensive and hard on the computers. So I would have 2 PCs on my desk at the same time, and 20% of the time, one or the other was rebooting, which causes me to say the Microsoft position is reboot. And I think for many of those years, what you can see down here is what I think the brand was of Microsoft, helping more people feel more stupid than any other company in the world. And I have many, many people ask me how to do things on Microsoft because they couldn't figure it out. It was not intuitive. It didn't just work. While Apple's brand is that it just works. Now, fortunately, Microsoft, I just got Office 365, has gotten significantly better, but still they have great difficulties with the whole customer experience. I've called into their support people for help recently, and I've had 4 calls with them to resolve a problem, and they can't seem to understand the problem that I'm having. Whereas with Apple, if you for example, have Apple Care and you call them up, actually you don't call them, they'll call you, which Microsoft is now doing. They will find the right person for you within the organization to solve your problem. You don't have to try to figure out how the organization that you're dealing with is organized and then call the right person. And many companies for their product support will say, well, that's not our department, call this number. You call this number and they won't know what you're talking about. And they'll say you should go back to or call some other number. And you end up explaining your problem again and again and again, and you can never seem to get it resolved. But with Apple, you make one call, they'll find the person that will solve your problem without you having to figure out who to talk to. Again, another example of customer-centric. And then what I'm talking about there is by customer-centric, it's the whole product. It's not just the hardware. It's not just the operating system. It's not just the software. It's not just how do you get help on it. I notice Office 365 just put a contextual help in there, which is helpful. But I wonder if anybody has tested it, because many times using that contextual help, it has no solution, no explanation to the problem that I'm having. It also includes the service that you get for the product if there should be some problem with it, and the overall purchase experience. One of the reasons that Steve Jobs wanted to open retail stores is he wanted to make sure that, as opposed to, for example, going into Best Buy, that the salespeople and the customer support people in the dealership thoroughly understands and knows the product. And he didn't think that was going to be possible when there's 20 or 30 different makes and models of personal computers sitting there. So that's why he opened a series of Apple stores, which, by the way, produces the greatest revenue per square foot than any other retailer in the world. And he also found that as he researched it, that Eddie Bauer, which was an outdoor outfitting company out of Seattle, Washington, they only had one door to go in or go out of, and he did that also in almost all of the Apple stores in order to control the whole experience. And this also includes picking the product up, taking it home, and opening up the box that it's in. And he felt the box should make the product to be like a little jewel. And that's why it's such a delightful experience to buy an Apple product and open it up. In fact, what I do now is I save the boxes that I get with my Apple products, and then when I resell it a few years later, people are delighted to be able to get the used product back or purchase it with the original packaging because of that. So what I talk about in building and scaling great products is what I call spices. It's the 6 keys to what a product needs to have to success. The first thing is the strategy, and that what I call that is a product market strategy, and there's 32 components of that. Frequently, companies will develop a product, take it to market, and then try to figure out what the value proposition is. And if I had a nickel for the number of times I've been called to find some customers for this product, I'd be a multimillionaire. The thing that most companies fail to do is put together their product market strategy. What should the product be willing to do? What's the value proposition? How is it positioned in the market? Has competitive research been done just before the product has been announced? Has the product positioning been put together based upon understanding what the customer wants to do, and so forth? There are 32 components of that. And in the certificate program at MandyPal on product management, those things are taught. And in my books from Wiley, I cover not only what needs to be done, like I covered in building and scaling great products, but I also cover how to do it, along with exercises and a workbook. And if you go through those books, or you subscribe to my online courses covering the product lifecycle framework, which I'll talk about in a moment, you'll get a workbook that you can use to put that strategy together. The second part is the process. And if you have a repeatable process that you're constantly improving on, then your chances for product success will improve. I had one customer that was building Wi-Fi networking equipment, and they developed and released 5 products, and they all failed, and they did not have a process. And the vice president there commented to me, if you do not have a process to follow, then it develops a culture of blame, where everyone blames everybody else for what's going on. The third thing that you need, the I in spices, is the information to make a decision. The fourth thing is you need to understand your customers, and that's the whole topic of this webinar today, is understanding your customers. The fifth thing is your employees. They need to have skill sets in order to get the job done. And in order to have a successful product, I've identified about 130 skill sets and competencies, which I cover most of which in my books. And last thing lastly, they need to have the systems and tools in order to monitor and have a dashboard on the status of their product, which in real time can be used to manage the product. So I mentioned the framework, and this is an example of a Agile product management lifecycle framework that I developed, because I found that the 8 other ones that are out there will probably increase one's chance of failure rather than increasing their chance of success. So I'll give you a moment to take a look through there, and then I'll make a few comments on it. Up here in the top part where you're doing your product planning or developing your product market strategy, these are all the components of the product market strategy, which need to be put together roughly in this order before you release it into product development. And that's typically done by people that are called product managers. After it's developed, then you need to do marketing and then the initial go-to-market, or some people call it the launch plan, which consists of all of these elements. And it is within all of this that I've mentioned the 130 competencies that the organization has to have at my friend R.N. Prasad's suggestion from, he used to be with Infosys, and he's also an advisor on the Manipul product management program. They need to have all of these competencies within the organization at the lowest level, basic, intermediate, and advanced in order to be successful. Now, one of the problems of becoming customer-centered is customers don't know what they want. And there's an old story, I don't know if it's an urban tale or not, but it makes sense, is Henry Ford went around when he was thinking about building a car, and he asked people if they would like to have a car. Well, they had no idea what a car was. They said, no, what I want is a faster horse. Hewlett-Packard went out and asked people if they wanted a color printer. They said, no, why would I want a color printer? Because a color printer didn't exist. And there's a big movement now using big data and analytics. Now, just imagine for a moment that if the internet existed when Henry Ford was thinking about building a car, and it was researched how many people are searching the internet for the word car, they would find none. Nobody was searching the internet for a car because nobody knew that it existed. What they wanted to do is get from one place to another faster. So if you go out and ask people what they want or need, they're not going to be able to tell you, especially if it's a new market or a new emerging market. The way you do that, the way you find out what they want and need, is you observe. You watch what they do, and then you ask them about it by interviewing and surveying. The other problem with big data and analytics is an outfit by the name of Cambridge Analytics, funded by Robert Mercer and Rebecca Mercer, very conservative advocates in the United States. And they went out and, using big data and analytics, they micro-targeted voters on the Brexit and on the recent president's election in the United States. And then they were able to use big data based upon what websites people went to, what their education and training is, and where they live, to target very specific messages based upon their psychology and their positions and their attitudes and their opinions during the Brexit election and during the Donald Trump's election. And using that big data, they were able to convince people to vote for Brexit and to vote for Donald Trump. The problem with that is it's based upon a concept that came in part out of Stanford called wisdom of the crowds. Well, how smart is the crowds if they happen to be in a bar or a nightclub late at night and a fire breaks out and they all try to get through the same door at exactly the same time? That's hardly wisdom of the crowds. Or if you're driving along and there's an accident on the other side of the road, and everybody stops to rubberneck and view the turmoil and that accident over there and slows all the traffic up. So while the wisdom of the crowds will tend to tell you, well, some people who look at this, some people that like this, look like this, some people who bought this, that's helpful. But if it's in a new and emerging market, they can't tell you what they need or what they want. So what I advocate is you start down here from the bottom up. You understand what people do. You then aggregate them into jobs, which Tony Ulrich from Synergem talks about, because what people and what companies want is the outcome. They want the results of what's going on. And I'll talk now a little bit more by what I mean by the do's. And these are the key questions that you need to answer to become customer-centric. And this is the slide and the words that you should remember from this webinar. Successful products are all about outcomes and what people and what organizations do. It's not about what they want. It's not about their needs, nor is it about technology. And I'll talk more about that in a moment. And these are the questions you need to get answered. What does your customer do? How do they do it? How difficult is it? What's the ideal solution for them? When did they do it? Why do they do it? Or what is the outcome you want to achieve? Where do you do it? Who do you do it? And for who for? How do you do it? What's standing in your way? And then most importantly, not only how important is this, because everyone prioritizes the features they develop based upon importance, but also how satisfied are they with the current solution? Because what you're trying to find is 15 unmet needs in order to build your product around those 15 unmet needs, those 15 unmet do's that your prospective customers want to do. And then the process for beginning your innovation and building an insanely great product is by understanding the do's. You can then do innovation, and innovation has become a hot term in recent years. And really what it's talking about is the ability to do something faster or better or cheaper or with some style. And then you incorporate good design, like Apple's design, Sony style design, which Apple borrowed when they recruited Helmut Essinger to do their designing for them, which leads to the design of Apple products today. And then it becomes easy to write a value proposition, as opposed to previous to this scenario, we would be handed a product that says, okay, find me some customers, and you try to figure out why was this product built and who was it aimed at. And when I took over the Apple III product line that I mentioned earlier, the first thing I did was go talk to Jeff Raskin, who is the architect of the Apple III in engineering. And he was also, by the way, the architect of the Macintosh. And Jeff told me specifically that he had targeted the Apple III for a market which later became known as small office, home office, and small and medium business. It was to overcome the design problems with the Apple II, for example, to have a shift key so it would be possible to type a sentence on the Apple III where the first letter in the sentence was capitalized. It was very difficult to do that on an Apple II. So he wanted to fix all those things, and that was what he had in his mind in terms of the value proposition. And he remarked to me that he had been at Apple for 5 years at that point, and I was the first person for marketing to come talk to him. So as a classic example of if you start with understanding what people do, it becomes very easy and not hard anymore to put together the value proposition for your product or for your service. So here in Silicon Valley, technology seems to be the hottest thing. And frequently, it turns out that it's a solution in search of a problem. You can't start with the technology. A lot of companies or venture capitalists say you have to develop a technology which gives you a competitive advantage over everybody else. Well, that will be fine if you know what your customer is doing. But if you start with the technology looking for a problem, chances for failure are significantly increased. Another fad that's been running around big time is this concept called ideation, where you get together in a room and you brainstorm ideas. Well, the problem with that, according to Tony Ulrich of outcome-driven innovation, a book that he's written. I highly recommend it to you. Is that you have to come up with 3 ideas times 15 unmet needs, or 3 to the 15. You have to generate 14 million ideas, and then somehow, some way in your lifetime and in the lifetime of maybe 100 other people, whittle those 14 million ideas down to 13,999,985. Get rid of those to identify the 15 unmet needs, which he has found in his research to be critical to having a successful product. So the way to do it is to understand what people do and think do. And in fact, going back to Procter & Gamble I was talking about before, a few years ago, the head of innovation there, I had been there 19 years, he did a podcast for Carnegie Mellon University, which I highly recommend you listen to. And they, when developing a consumer product, they do like dish soap and other kinds of consumer products. He would send his product managers and his researchers out like social anthropologists and observe what housewives do. And from that, after observing 40 people over a month or two, he found out exactly what their products need to do in order to satisfy the unspoken and unexpressible needs and wants of his prospective customers, just like HP did with the next bench syndrome. Then at a higher level, in terms of understanding what people and companies want to do, and if you're in a business-to-business business, then what I strongly recommend is you understand what your business's customer wants to do. And if you understand your customer's customer better than your customer does, then you've got a way of sharing information with them such that if they go to one of your competitors, they will lose all of that information that you have about their customer. And it's one way of building customer loyalty in a business-to-business environment. So let's take a look at a couple examples. The railroad business grew up in the United States before Alfred Sloan got involved with his manufacturing and claiming that inventory is an asset and people are liabilities. And the railroads had the opportunity, since they were the only organization that had 1,000 employees or more, and there was no other organization in the world other than the military that were that large. So he borrowed concepts of authority, chain of command, breaking groups down into squadrons and regiments and divisions and squads and that kind of stuff. And the railroads copied that management approach from the military. And at the time, there was new technology coming along to move people and goods called automobiles and trucks and buses and so forth. But the railroad industry decided to define themselves as being in that market, which at the time was defined as railroads. The captains of the railroad said, "We are in the railroad business." As a result, they missed the opportunity to jump in on building roads. After all, they had built railroad lines across the United States and many of them in India. They missed the opportunity to get involved in automobiles and trucks and in airplanes. The problem is they should have defined their business as transporting goods and people because like the Henry Ford prospective customers, they didn't want a car, they wanted a faster horse. They wanted to get from point A to point B faster. And most recently, even given this history, we had a company in the United States called Eastman Kodak. They employed hundreds of thousands of people. They were worth billions of dollars. They defined their business as film, still film and moving film. And the executives of that were so strongly felt they were in the film business that even though Kodak invented the digital camera in 1973, they actively worked to suppress it. And they suppressed that camera. In fact, even to the point when I was handling the public relations for a company that did digital film or SD cards for cameras, we licensed our patents to Kodak, and the same captains of their moving film and still film divisions killed the use of those patents, and they gave them back. They didn't want to get into the digital film business because they were afraid that digital film would obsolete and cannibalize the film business. Now, Kodak is a fraction of what they used to be. They're worth less than $1 billion. They have nothing to do with images right now. But if they had defined themselves as being in the capture, storage, retrieval, and presentation of images, just think how big they could be now by owning a big part of that business and that industry and that market. So the key here is defining what business are you in, not what market you are in. So in conclusion, the concept of being customer-centric started at Procter & Gamble in the 1930s, in great part with Hewlett-Packard saying our divisions and our people have to stay as close to the customer as possible. And it's been carried on now by companies such as Apple and Amazon, where they focus on the whole product experience, the whole customer concept. If I buy a product from Amazon online and it's shipped to me, I get it in 2 days or less. And if I'm not happy with it, I can send it back at no cost to me in the first 30 days. In fact, it's gotten to the point through the Amazon Prime program that they have that I very seldom go out to a retail store and shop because the stores have such depleted things in the store, or they're focusing on wisdom of the crowds, and that is only selling the stuff that sells in high volumes, where I can find the niche products very easily, and in a matter of a few mouse clicks, it will show up on my doorstep if I can wait a couple of days. The fourth takeaway from this webinar is to understand what your customer does and use that as the source of your innovation. And the fifth thing is the market, the railroad market, the film market, that's not your business. It's the do. It's the moving of freight and people from place to place, and it's the capture, storage, retrieval, and display of images. So let me suggest you connect with me. That's my profile on LinkedIn so we can stay in touch. There's my email address, which you can use to connect with me. That's my website, and a lot of what I've talked about here are in free blog articles on my website. And if you're interested, follow me on Twitter. So now I'll try to answer some of your questions. And I'll go back here. What keeps me going, someone asked, after doing close to 50 years, well, it's just 3 more years to be 50 years. Here's why. And a company did did a study of all of the money spent in the world for new product development. And the world spends about $1.6 trillion in 2014. Several professors at North Carolina found that roughly 35 to 45% of those products fail. That means the world is wasting about $0.6 to $0.75 trillion a year. And what keeps me going is, I think, having made many of the mistakes I talk about in my training and my books, having made many of those mistakes, that if there's anything I can do to help reduce that waste, then the lives of people throughout the world, including in India, could be substantially improved by not having wasted stuff that has produced nothing, while in turn could be producing wealth and helping people out. So that's what got me going in all these books and starting to write them several years ago. Can you help us understand my views of the information technology sector and rapidly changing at a very fast pace? Yeah, I understand that's a major issue in India right now because your service sector, your IT sector, grew enormously during the I forget what they call it, when we switched over from 1999 to the year 2000, because the engineers 20, 30 years earlier never thought we would all live that long, I guess. And there's, of course, a rapid change in the technology of writing computer code now with the involvement of artificial intelligence. So there's layoffs happening and coming big time in that sector. What I strongly recommend, and one of the reasons I'm interested in India and in China, is that your economies are greatly based upon that. But if you get out there and you look at what people do, and the way people do things in India are different than the way people do things in the United States or in France or in Belgium or whatever it may be, there are millions of new products that could be developed that will improve the lives of what people do in India, that you can use your computer skills if you learn how to do the product management and the product marketing skills and build yourself a nice little business and a nice little niche. So that's the thing to do. And Manipal Global Education has a curriculum specifically on that. So to give them another plug, that's the place to get started, and use that course as a means of putting together your business plan and your product market strategy. How do you keep yourself motivated in a competitive environment? You have to constantly innovate, constantly monitor, and what my partner Mike Connor says, set up customer listening posts in order to observe what is going on and adjust accordingly, not like Kodak failed to do in terms of adjusting to the changing market conditions with the result of digital film. Doesn't the do come with the customer demand? Aren't the two related? Yeah, they are. But the demand is caused because of what people want to do, not based upon them being able to explain to you what their need or their want is. I work on data analytics. I don't know how to look for ideas for building products. Well, go back to my point earlier. The analytics is sort of like looking backwards. It's like a crab walking on a beach looking backwards. It's like sitting on the back of a train saying everything is doing just great, but up ahead the bridge is out. So the analytics is only good for established businesses, established markets, where the market has tended to mature. But for new markets and for emerging markets, it's not going to tell you because people can't tell you what they need. What are the best techniques to observe is a question. Follow the approach of designers and of social anthropologists. Just put yourself in the environment and watch them. Let's suppose you're trying to put together a new IT service to be used internally by purchasing agents. Just go sit in their office and watch them what they do through the day and make notes. And after you're finished with those observations, ask them questions about what they do, why they do it, when they do it, where they do it, and so forth. How do we remove our biases? That's the same problem that a professionally trained journalist has. And they go back to the same questions. In fact, that's where I got those questions earlier about who, what, when, where, why, how, and ID. Those are the fundamental questions you learn as a trained journalist. So you act as a journalist, and by observing, you don't bias them. You don't ask them, and you try to avoid asking them the question of things like, when did you stop beating your wife? Where you start out with an assumption of what you think they're going to do, and then you start talking about the conclusion. Another person says, always found challenges about product market fit, defining them. How do you go about them? That again goes back to understanding what people do. And if you understand what people do, you can then aggregate those do's into jobs, outcomes, market segments, and markets. And that will easily help you identify the product market fit. The podcast for Carnegie Mellon, I don't have that link handy right now, but if you send me an email, I'll look it up and try to find it for you. What has been the most significant milestone in your life? I've done a number of things. I started the flying club at the University of Michigan in my freshman year. I started a national student group in support of science and technology in the American Space Shuttle and supersonic transport. And in my sophomore year, I was testifying before Congress and going to meetings at the White House. I became one of the first environmental mediators in the world and resolved several major environmental economic disputes, which helped me a great deal later in terms of working with teams and being a product manager. I ran the business unit group for the Apple III at Apple at the same management level of Steve Jobs. So I've had a number of milestones that make me at least a legend, at least in my own mind. Well, that's a good question. I work in the clothing retail industry. What would be the best examples of questions to ask customers to find out what it is that they're looking for? Well, again, that goes back to the problem. You can't ask them what they do. We've had a company in the United States just pop up recently in the clothing business. It has a name along the lines of leaving your shirt out, where some people, a style developed about 10, 15 years ago, where you walk around with your shirt not tucked in but hanging out. And apparently this company found that that those shirts didn't look all that good. So he invented a shirt specifically to be able to not have to tuck it in, which is kind of interesting. He apparently is being very successful. A few years earlier, a company came up with socks that were not matched. And apparently that was the big fad among elementary school young children, where you buy 3 pair of socks and none of the 6 socks matched. Well, I could have gave them some of my socks to solve that problem, but that's a company that popped up. So in the clothing industry, observe people. What are they doing? Are they carrying water bottles around, for example? Maybe they could use a jacket that has a specific place to put a water bottle rather than having to keep it in your hand all the time, or buy a separate sling in order to hold the bottle so that you can have both hands free to talk on the telephone on one and to drive the car on the other, or to text at the same time, that type of thing. So again, it goes back to observing what people do, and from that you can get an insight of what their needs are, and then after that you can interview them about their needs. And after that, you can survey them about their needs and then extrapolate those surveys into the size of the market. What's the basic exercise to give us on building a product or service, a beginner level based on exploration to what is our understanding about product management? Well, that is the product market strategy course that I have, and it's available on Udemy. You can find it by going through my website. Now, keep in mind, this is not something you're going to do overnight. It's not something you're going to do in a week or in a month. We're talking at least 3 months of concentrated effort to go out and observe and understand and interview and survey, and then put together your competitive and market research, your product positioning, your value proposition, and everything else that you need, these 32 items to have in a product market strategy. But I guarantee that if you take those 3 to maybe as much as 6 months just to do that work before you go spend a nickel on product development, then you will be insanely successful. And that's, I wish I could say I can wave a magic wand and you can come up with an idea that's going to sell like hotcakes. It's not, because you don't know everything that you need to know. I'll give you an example. RCN magazine gave me credit for having shipped the first ad on the cell phone, and that was in 2003. And I went around and talked to 200 venture capitalists to fund the start of my company, Maui Games /AdSell Media. And I couldn't find a single VC that understood advertising, understood video games on phones, and understood cell phones. Today, that's about a $15 billion a year industry. And one of the reasons that I failed is that I built a little app called Light My Fire, and Encore, and it was a virtual cigarette lighter out of a telephone, on a cell phone, because back in the 2000s, people would go to concerts and they'd want to have an encore, and I don't know about India, but in the United States, people would hold up their lighters and wave it back and forth to get an encore. Well, a lot of people had stopped smoking. They no longer had a lighter, so I put a lighter on their cell phone, and they would hold them up at concerts. And they did that at the Hollywood Bowl in Southern California, and the Los Angeles Times noticed it, and they did an article about Light My Fire, or in that case, it was Encore. Well, I was able to put ads in that application to help finance it, and it turned out that I had gone for my market research from the top down. I had built the Encore app for a Nokia telephone, because Nokia said they had the largest market share worldwide. Well, it turned out that they didn't in the United States. They only had 2 phones on the market through AT&T, and neither of those phones had the capability to run that little app. But I had 10,000 users of that app in Europe, but I didn't have a sales force selling advertising in Europe. So I had a disconnect between my product and the distribution channel. And developing and identifying the distribution channel as part of your product market strategy is something that I should have done before I committed the resources to have that cell phone application developed. Data usage has dramatically increased in India in the last 5 years. What is the future of this business in the next 5 years? Well, that's the digital transformation, where every company and individual are rapidly moving towards doing the same things that they've done in the past, but doing it digitally. And a classic example of that is Kodak, as it moved from capturing images using chemicals on film to capture, the market moved from that to capturing images the data in zeros and ones, and then retrieving and displaying that. So every thing that we do is susceptible to a data revolution. A huge thing that's happening now is being called a technology called Internet of Things. And I always wondered about it. That was sort of like a technology in search of a problem. But can you imagine this, that, and it's going on, this work is going on now at the University of Michigan, my alma mater, in self-driving cars, where you've got sensors in each of the cars, and they're talking to the lights, the red lights and the green lights at the intersections, and they're talking to the next one, such that when you have a traffic jam like we now have here in Silicon Valley, and you guys have in Bangalore, if the light changes, all the cars can speed up at exactly the same time, rather than waiting for that delay from one car to the next, waiting for the car in front of you to move. And that could all be automatically controlled. Traffic in one direction, which is heavy, could be communicating with the traffic light in real time, and the traffic light duration would be adjusted in real time. And then I was asked recently, what's the technology that I'm most excited about? And that's self-driving cars. Imagine, for example, I teach over at Cisco, about 15 miles from where I live in Saratoga. I go over to San Jose. Imagine if I had a self-driving car and I paid for it, and they're selling for anywhere from $13,000 to $35,000 and more. And instead of parking the car in this huge parking lot that Cisco has while I'm teaching, I can push a button on my smartphone and I can say, go make some money for me. And somebody nearby orders up my car, and it takes people around during the day making money for me, automatically pulls up to the recharging station when it needs a charge, gets its charge, and goes back to work. So in addition to making money teaching, I could have my car running around teaching. And why do I need a parking lot? So that provides an opportunity to convert existing parking lots and existing parking structures into housing that's more affordable than what's available today in Silicon Valley. So those kinds of changes, people don't People need to park their car, but they don't have to do that if the car is running around as a capital expense and is making money for them. Today, online trading is becoming the order of the day. Is this trending? What is the future for distribution companies? That's a tough one. The future of distribution companies is changing. Give you an example. A few years ago, I wanted to buy a new stove, a new microwave, and a new refrigerator. And part of that is what I call now the customer journey, where there's 8 steps to the customer journey. So the future of distribution companies is embodied in understanding those 8 steps and what role, especially digitally, a distribution company can play. I would go to distributors and or their retailers and try to figure out what stoves, microwaves, and refrigerators were on the market. And none of those organizations had all the information. So then I had to go to the manufacturer's site. So I went to Whirlpool, Electrolux, GE, all the big brands in the appliances area. And I finally narrowed it down to the make and model of the appliance I wanted to buy. Then I would go back to the distribution company or the retailers because I couldn't get a price for it on the service or on the manufacturer's website, and I would get a price there. And then it occurred to me, I was developing a course on negotiation. I opened up a chat window from 8 distributors and or retailers, and I said, okay, I'm looking for LG refrigerator model XYZ, or whatever it was. What's your best price on it? And they all would shoot back through the chat session their best price. Then I would copy the best price from the best one and paste it into the other 7 and say, All American Appliance is selling this LG refrigerator for this price. Can you match that or beat it? And 2 or 3 of them would drop out of the competition, and 4 or 5 of them would say, yeah, I could do that for you $100 less or $200 less. And then I just repeated that same process over and over again. In about 15 minutes, I saved myself over $3,000. So understanding the customer journey, what causes them to get off the status quo, what's the trigger point, what things are they looking for in terms of information to consider for their alternatives, what is their criteria for deciding that a product is the product they're going to buy, how do they build a business case for it. Even in the case of a company that makes children's toys, what is it that's going to convince the child to want that toy and to get the buyer, their parents, to fork over the money in order to buy it. So the future of distribution is you're not in the distribution business, you're in the business of helping people get things done that they want to do through their customer journey. And if you view it from those eyes, then you don't need to worry anymore about whether or not you're going to become obsolete. And a distribution company could evolve itself into something new. Example of this is a friend of mine is a chiropractor, and he's into holistic medicine. And he noticed that his chiropractic business was declining back in the 90s, but he was selling homeopathic medicines off the shelf in his office. But if he didn't get the traffic coming into his office for chiropractic care, he was selling less and less than that. I suggested he set himself up as a e-commerce site, and now he's doing over $100,000 a year at foresthealth.com in these same products. And he began to understand the customer journey and how the market was changing because of the digital revolution. And he adjusted, and now that is probably 95% of his business, the e-commerce business. How do we ensure that we're not creating a product just to serve a fad? Well, fads aren't too bad in order to get started. The important thing is, of course, observe what people do, and then keep in mind that the fad may fade, so find something related to that where you can move off into that direction. For sustainability, what is more important? Business with high volumes having less margins, or business with low volumes having higher margins? Well, those are only a couple of pricing strategies. There's probably 3/4 of a dozen pricing strategies. It depends upon your goals. Your goals could be high profitability, high margins. Your goals could be volume, unit volume. It could be market share in a mature business. You can't say one or the other is that. When I was at Apple, the criticism then of doing low-cost products was that the Apple II sold for $2,000, and they didn't have the distribution channel to handle lower priced products. Skip forward 20 years, and they've got the iPod out there for a few $100s. And look at what they're doing now. They got products anywhere from $30 or $40 for adapters up to the latest iMac of $17,000. So they put together a distribution channel that enables them to handle that entire breadth of product. So it's not necessarily one or the other. It goes back to what your goal is. Today, automation is what every company is looking at in order to reduce costs. Is this the right strategy? This could affect people. Certainly will affect people, and people are going to have to change as automation and artificial intelligence gets smarter and smarter and is able to do things that people really don't want to do. And the Industrial Revolution took us through all of this, and people changed. My grandfather was the blacksmith to the governor of Kiev in the Ukraine. And of course, blacksmith jobs are no longer around, but auto mechanics came out of that. And as companies have evolved, we're going to start seeing self-healing cars. So it'll then be the people that are writing the artificial intelligence programs to maintain the cars. So you have to look ahead and not be afraid of automation taking your job away. We've got a major problem in the United States now with Trump's banning of immigrants. We have fewer and fewer people to pick our crops and clean our houses, which are what the people from the Central America have been doing for us for the last 20 or 30 years. So our price of food's going up. Farmers are having problems because they can't harvest or plant their crops. And that's evolving into more local farming and organic farming, where you grow your food as close to where it's consumed as possible, rather than in the Midwest and ship it to California or the California valleys and shipping it across the entire country, or for that matter, around the world. So look at the social, economic, environmental, technological, and political changes that are happening, and adjust your business plans taking those things into account. What do I think is the next new thing? I think it's several of them. I think it's the Internet of Things, but defined in terms of what people do. For example, I have a little microphone that attaches to the battery in my smoke alarm, and if my house catches on fire, I immediately get a text message. I've got a little device that's called Roost. I got another little device called a Boomerang, which is attached to my electric bike. If someone steals my electric bike, I can track it because it uses the cell phone network, and I can find the person that stole it, just like I can do that with Find My iPhone or Find My Mac. All of these little types of things. If I had a garden, there are sensors out there that can detect how much water and will turn on the water when the plants need the water based upon the type of plant it is. That's going to be huge. Self-driving cars is going to be huge. It's going to reduce our need for the expansive roads that we have. It's going to reduce the need for the huge parking lots that we have. And it's going to be a boon for places like Bangalore and Silicon Valley. I've seen your traffic. I've tried to learn your language of the horn to tell people when you're passing on the left side or the right side. And I took the drive to Mysore to visit the Mysore Royal University there and give a talk a few years ago. And I swear that road has more potholes in it than that it has cars. The whole questions of our costs of infrastructure is going to change greatly as a result of self-driving cars, artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things, and a few others. And the thing to do is to think about those things and time your entry in the market once and not until you have found 15 unmet needs. Because I've been early in many, many markets, like my example earlier of the cell phone advertising, only to not have the resources to outlast that and wait until the window of opportunity comes up. One of my students at Cisco says, how do you know when you should obsolete your product? And for that matter, how do you know when the window of opportunity exists? That is based upon tracking those 15 unmet needs. When the 15 unmet needs come up from your observations and your market research, your interviews and surveys, that's the time to enter the market. When those 15 unmet needs begin to go away, then you convert yourself to what the Boston Consulting Group calls a cash cow. You just make money off of it and develop something new. But if you're not tracking unmet needs, you won't know when it's going to be more than a fad and a real business, and when you should be exiting that business. In customer segmentation, once we've identified the dominant segment and weaker segment, what do you suggest on which segment about the company to take action first? Well, that depends greatly upon your resources. If you're a company like Apple, there are lots of market segments out there, but they're too small for a company like Apple to even bother going after. If it's a smaller company, and that's one of the things I did with the Apple III, is niche that puppy, is we tried to find a little market niche where we could focus all of our resources and beat everybody else, even though within the overall market, they may have a better product. So by focusing on a specific niche, you can probably reduce your competition to almost nobody or nobody. So for example, maybe you've got a product that applies to everybody that lives in Bangalore, but your competitors are in southern Bangalore, and you found that you could focus on northeast Bangalore, and they don't have the resources to get up there, and you're there all by yourself. So that's how you figure that out. And while you're at it, try to finish the road from the airport to the city. I'm looking for another question to answer. Problem is, only the latest questions show up, so I have to scroll way back up, and then if someone asks another question, the chat thing jumps to the bottom. What is the one trait you consider necessary in an inspiring marketing person? I think it's an ability to synthesize what the customer wants to do in coming up with language that that's part of your messaging that really tells them. Like my idea that Microsoft should change their slogan, their tagline, to helping more people feel more stupid than any other company in the world. Now that's, of course, a negative and kind of funny statement, but to be able to synthesize that. This is something that Steve Jobs was very, very good at, getting the essence of the message simple. For example, when he introduced the iPad, a lot of people said, I don't see how this thing's going to be successful because it doesn't have a stylus, it doesn't have a pencil. But they completely missed the fact that he picked up the iPad from his desk that he was standing at after he introduced it, and he went over to a chair like in his living room, and he sat down and he started consuming media on it. It was introduced as a mobile media consumption device for reading, for books, for videos, for music, and so forth. And in fact, there was no camera on it, the first iPad. He didn't think anybody wanted to hold this big thing up to take a picture. And he was right. It was a media consumption device, not a media creation device. And a lot of people miss that. Now they have the iPad Pro series, which is both consumption but mostly focused on professionals for media creation. what is the advice for people who would like to get into product management? I've got a blog article on that on my website. The primary thing is you need to demonstrate to your hiring manager that you know how to do the job. And what I advocate you do is take the ManiPal curriculum, do the work throughout the course, save that all as a portfolio just like a graphics designer would. And then when you go in to interview for a job, you can say, you bring your portfolio along with you and say, look, I know how to do the job, and here's an example of the work that I've done. And I guarantee you'll get hired in an instant because most people trying to get into product management have no idea what they're doing, and they learn on the job. And the hiring managers have no idea if the people they hire have the skill sets, the competencies in order to be able to do the job. Now, this is not going to be easy. It's going to take you 11 months in the case of that program in order to get it nailed down. But if you buckle down and if you do it, you will get a job and you'll get paid substantially more than your colleagues because you have a set of skill sets that will then enable you to catapult yourself to the presidency or CEO of your own company or some other company. Because as I mentioned earlier, the CEO of Procter & Gamble has come out of brand management, every single one of them, since 1932. And the same thing could be true for you. Profitability versus affordability. Is this a challenge because of the short product life cycle due to constantly changing tastes, wants of customers, and rapid innovations? That's a glittering generality. You've got Apple, which is pushing 40% margins, very, very profitable, and their focus is on value. And they decided that if they focus on customer satisfaction, on customer-centric, and getting close to the customer, profits will just take care of itself. They don't make their decisions based upon profitability. Affordability deals with the subject that I'm sure you're all familiar with is the elasticity of demand. And that's where your market research will tell you at what price point could you maximize profits if that's your objective. But if your objective is customer satisfaction, and in the case of Apple, it's customer satisfaction, customer-centric, because they believe if you buy one of their products and you love it because it just works, you'll tend to buy other products. And in fact, in the case of Apple, Steve hated selling to enterprises because all the head of IT at enterprises cared about was the price of the computers. And he wanted to charge more. He wanted to have a value product rather than a price competitive product. And Apple generally did not penetrate the enterprise. A couple of years ago, IBM announced a massive program to develop hundreds of applications for the iPhone and the iPad for enterprises. And just a couple of weeks ago, Cisco was very excited about a partnership that they formed with Apple, also to help Apple devices be used in the enterprise. When I was consulting with Cisco 7 years ago, and I called their technical support for my Mac, they practically laughed at me and many times hung up. They said, well, the problem's a Mac, we can't help you, we can't support you. But what happened, I was just there earlier this week teaching a class, and 75% of the students in the class had a Mac. And the reason for that is because people started buying iPhones 10 years ago, noticed that, hey, this thing is pretty easy to use as opposed to the Microsoft phone, for example, and they started taking it into work. And that forced the company to start supporting the iPhone. And then people said, hey, let's check out the Macintosh, and they started buying the Macintoshes. And in fact, after these recent 2 ransomware waves that have spread around the world, a recent survey I saw is 1 out of every 4 people plan to buy a Macintosh in the next 6 months. So that's how you transition yourself in terms of taking market share. And an example of by not focusing just on affordability and just on price and providing value, you can change different things in industries. And that's one of the things that's beginning to change in India and in China, is that there's been these decades-long focus just on price alone, and that's all that's important. Now people are beginning to understand, particularly in the middle class, the valuable aspects of buying something that's valuable and something that lasts. I've got a brother-in-law that was cheap, and I'm sure you all have people in your families like this, and he went out and bought a used Windows-based computer, drove all the way across town to pick this thing up for $300, and I bought a Mac for $1,200, and within a year that computer failed, just died on him, and he had to go back out in the marketplace and buy another one. So the cost of ownership of a Mac, for example, is 20% less than the cost of ownership of a Windows computer, according to an IBM study. And companies that were price-oriented only, and people in India and people in China that are price-oriented only, are in many cases beginning to change what their priorities are. If a service-based organization tries to become a product-based organization, it seems like a huge change. How do you think organizations can transform themselves, like Indian IT? It was exactly that same question that the country of Singapore asked me to come there about 5 years ago and teach them how to transition from a service business, an IT services business, because they can no longer compete with India on price or with China at that point in time, to a product business. The key thing is to learn how to develop a product market strategy. And in fact, I talked on this subject to 17 vice presidents of Infosys about 4 years ago. And learn and understand the principles of building an insanely great product, which I talked about earlier in the webinar, and implement those throughout the organization. It turns out that business analysts in IT departments do about 70% of the job of a product manager. And I've identified those competencies on a blog post up on my website. So the thing you do is you train your people at your IT services company in product management, and they will help lead you out. In particular, it deals with finding out what your customer requirements are. What is it that your customer wants to do, how they want to do it, where they want to do it, and so forth. That comes from everything I talked about in this webinar today, and then building the product for that. Unfortunately, after I left Infosys, I've been told the VP of Finance says, wait a minute, I'm making $200 an hour off of my IT service people and paying them like $10, $20, $25 an hour, and it's going to take a couple years to build a profitable product. We can't do that. So they went right back to the services model and did not get into the product model extensively, as far as I know. But the thing that he's missing by looking at it purely by Sloan's accounting systems is that it's not repeatable. After that project is done, you can't make any more money off of that project. But if you developed a product, it's scalable and it's repeatable, and you can grow the company, because we wouldn't have the companies the size of Apple and Amazon and others if they were just doing services. And don't forget that services also are products. A service is an intangible product. A product is something that you can touch. I think we've gone to our limit. I should ask the host, are we supposed to stop now?
Yeah, I think we've answered a bunch of questions. What we can do is we'll make a note of the rest of the questions, and maybe we can email those to you, David, and when you have the time, we could respond over email.
Okay, and then you'll put it up on your website?
Yes.
Okay.
You can do that. Yes.
I'd be happy to do that. Or if someone has a particular question, they can feel free to email me.
Yes, we can share your email address with those who attended today's session.
Okay, great.
And yeah, people can get in touch. That would be great. Thanks so much, David. Thank you for the session. We've enjoyed this so much. I've heard the whole session myself, and it's been really interesting to hear about your experience and about product management coming from an expert like yourself. And thank you to all the attendees for joining us today. I'm sure you've enjoyed today's session as well. We will share a recorded version of today's session with all the attendees. And we'll also shortly email a feedback form on today's session. So, if, to the attendees, if you find 5-10 minutes anytime today, do send us your feedback. So that is all from our end today. Thank you, David, and thanks to all the attendees.
You're welcome, and have a good evening, and I'm going to go back to sleep.
Yeah. Thank you so much for doing us at this odd hour.
You're welcome.
All right. Thanks, everyone. You may log off.